Today's episode of What's the Big Idea is brought to you by Healthy Debate. Oh, yeah, healthy debate. When we're encouraged and encourage our students to debate important issues in a constructive way, we not only strengthen our own understanding of the issue, we sometimes find ourselves surprised at what we've learned and how our perspective can shift. Don't want to live in a bubble? Healthy debate is a surefire way to ensure that you don't. Now on to the show.
Shadow of uncertain living, hang low and keep us in mind. And though nature ain't forgiving, that doesn't mean she isn't kind.
A lot of what happens in education is people who are just concerned with how do I keep my job? How do I keep my job? It's by not rocking the boat. It's by not doing anything different. It's not challenging the status quo in any real way.
Secondly, my job is to teach. So of course, students are going to kind of rely on me now because I'm building up their literary knowledge. They don't have the same knowledge that I do yet.
With smiling lips and searching eyes. I don't care for the...
Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. I've got a great episode for you today. Those voices you just heard are my guests who have some serious food for thought about teaching and learning literature. I don't remember much of what I read in high school English class. Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston stands out, and a few short stories, fragments of the Odyssey. Other than that, I can't recall much of what I read, and I've often wondered why. Was it the curriculum? Was it my teachers? I wonder if it's because I wasn't much of a reader in high school. I didn't become a reader until my 20s, and maybe if I'd been a reader in my teens, the high school literature would have made more of an impression. Or possibly it made an impression in ways invisible to me then. Since the killing of George Floyd, a whole lot about education has come under the microscope, perhaps nothing more so than the literature students are reading. But this debate goes back way before Floyd, and it cuts to the heart of many of the questions that have cropped up around education in the past few decades. Are there certain texts, the canon as it's called, that all students should read? Is there a place for student choice in the classroom? What's the role of the teacher? And what are the goals of an English department? To really dig into this question of what's happening in literature classrooms around the country, I reached out to two teachers, Jasmine Lane and Jared Amato. As you'll hear in a few minutes, both are enthusiastic, eloquent defenders of their approaches. And boy, could those approaches not be more different. Jasmine is a high school English teacher in Minnesota. She can be found online at Ms. Jasmine MN on Twitter and jasmineteaches.wordpress.com. She's also been published in multiple education outlets, including EdWeek. Jared teaches high school English in Tennessee, and he's the creator of Project Lit, which you'll hear about in our conversation. He's found online at Jared Amato on Twitter and jaredamato.wordpress.com, and that's Jared with 2 R's. I interviewed Jasmine and Jared on separate days, and what I have for you now is a mashup, or a remix if you will, of my conversations with each of them. Though I have not included the entirety of either of the interviews, I've done my best to present their ideas in a way that captures the main thrust while also providing a rich contrast. I began by asking each of them about the power of literature and the importance of teaching it now.
Well, one big thing is I spend a lot of time thinking about what my experience was like. And it was, reading books that your teacher was really passionate about and they can explain things. And then you have class discussions where you hear what your classmates are thinking about something. And then you hear what they say and you reflect on it yourself and you apply it to whatever situation is in your own life. And I just feel like there aren't necessarily a lot of subjects that allow you to do that. Sometimes in literature, I feel like sometimes there's more truth in literature than there necessarily is in nonfiction, because you can kind of step outside of, the realness and see what an author has concocted for you to think about. It's like they're commenting on reality through this novel or whatever they're writing, and I think that's just a powerful moment for teachers and students to kind of be in together.
Yeah, you recently wrote an opinion piece in EdWeek, not about literature per se, but in the piece you wrote, Literature attests that people have been here before, and their experience can strengthen us if we know how to access it. So, I guess maybe two parts to this question here. How can literature help us through times like this, where all of the things are happening, pandemic, social unrest, etc.? And then part two, what do you mean by if we know how to access it?
Yeah, I mean, so the a novel that is just like so spot on for right now is Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. It talks about, navigating the world, like trying to fit yourself into systems and hoping that they'll work for you. It talks about internalized racism while experiencing outward racism. It talks about like trying to he goes into the Communist Party and he's like, these people are going to fix me too. But it obviously doesn't work. And it's just like, it was written 70 years ago, but it's so useful for today. And I think that there's something about, going into the past and seeing what other people have done, how they've thought about something to add on to your own perspective of living in the now. Like what I tell my students is I say we read the past to better understand the present so that we don't repeat it in the same way in the future. So that's why I haven't taught Invisible Man, and I don't know if I will. It's like 600 pages. But like that's when when I'm thinking of literature, that's how I'm thinking it. I'm like, where else have we been in the past in our literary tradition where, we can think about who else has kind of been through this before? It says something. You feel like a connection because it's just like they get so much. But if you're reading things from the past, it's a different perspective. It's a different language. It's different customs and all of that. And so, if I were to give my students just like, read Invisible Man, read all 600 pages at home, and then just come and understand it and obviously be able to like talk about it. That's what I mean by accessing it. Like just because you pick up a book doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be able to understand it. And sometimes you do need a teacher to kind of fill in the gaps. And that's what literature is. Just like there is, like you're going to get some of it, but the deeper stuff, you maybe just are building up your literary knowledge in your head. And that's what I'm here for.
Backstory, right? So my dad passed away just about a year ago. And as I was looking through my old, pictures and yearbooks and things that he had kept in his house, I came across my journal from first grade. And it was like, dear future second grade teacher, my name is Jared Amato. I'm 7 years old. My brother's name is Zachary. I love basketball and baseball and reading and writing. And so for me, like even as a 7-year-old, I identified with literature, right? With reading and writing, with stories. I remember in third grade writing my own book for the first time and going through a childhood, right, where we kind of moved around a lot, and books were always, and not just books, right? Newspapers and magazines and fiction or nonfiction, just like stories and reading and writing has always been a part of my life. And so as an English teacher, to be in a classroom with young people, reading and writing together as we try to make sense of this crazy world we live in, right? Sometimes to escape, to heal, to process, to grieve, to imagine. Like there's just so many beautiful things about literature and about reading and writing. And as an English teacher, it's just the coolest job in the world to be able to help students see the power in that. For high schoolers, either like for the first time or helping them fall in love with reading and writing again. And so it's just been really powerful for me throughout my life. And then to know that we're able to create, a classroom environment and space where we can help students do that too.
Were you a reader growing up? Would you describe yourself as a reader? You were?
Big time. And I remember being really excited learning how to read. And then through elementary school, just devoured books and series. Mm-hmm. Middle school, I think I did. I think it faded a little bit in middle school. And then by high school, man, I was so busy with like just keeping up with, the grades and the extracurriculars and sports and everything else that I think I read on my own, but in terms of like, reading all the books in school, I think it kind of definitely stopped by high school.
Yeah. What was high school English like for you?
I've been thinking about that a lot, right? I'm a high school English teacher. So I think the fact that I don't have many memories says a lot, right? Like I just don't. I remember trying to stay awake sometimes. I can picture like us being in a circle and just like trying to stay awake sometimes. I remember playing the game really well. right? Like I knew a spark noted my way. I'd find like the quotes or the theme or the motif or whatever we had to do. I would go back through and like find what I needed. I mean, maybe I think I probably read some if I had the time and was interested enough, but like I vividly remember like you have a couple papers to turn in and then you just like, maybe you contribute, you pull out, you know how to play. Yeah, I was good enough at playing the game by that point, but I can't say that I have like really, really awesome or transformative memories from the high school experience.
As our conversations unfolded, I asked both Jasmine and Jared to talk about the idea of the canon, or at least the idea that there are some works of literature that are essential. You can probably name a lot of canonical literature. It was most likely what you were taught in high school, names like Shakespeare, Faulkner, and Fitzgerald. Here's Jasmine and Jared exploring their thoughts around this question. How would you define the term the literary canon? Where does that fit for you?
So I wouldn't say it's like the literary canon because there's multiple. If you're studying African American literature from the 19th century, there's specific authors that you're going to look at there. If you're studying post-colonial literature, there's certain authors that you're going to look in there. I mean, we can do British literature, we can do Restoration literature in, Britain too. So it really just depends whatever your area, literary period, time frame you're studying. And it's really the people who kind of made a mark, whose work has been lasting. So Kate Chopin, if you're going to study feminist literature, you have to, because she was kind of one of those, for all she's written, like she's, middle-class white woman, whatever, but she was kind of one of those first people to start talking about like feminism in literature. So you can't talk about feminist literature in the United States without talking about Kate Chopin.
So why do you think literary canon has, in some circles, become almost a dirty word in teaching literature?
So there's a number of reasons, because for a long time, it was only seen as like, I'm going to call it what people call it, the quote unquote dead white men. For a long time, it was seen that way. But if you have expertise in literature or in English or in any subject, you instantly are able to see that that's not the case. So in my American literature survey course, we read Zora Neale Hurston. We also read Richard Wright. We also read Walt Whitman, and we read Faulkner, because those are like the greats of American literature. But a lot of times, most English teachers don't necessarily have a degree in literature. At least in Minnesota, you only have to have a minor, which means you take 4 classes. So obviously that lack of expertise in your subject is going to influence how you perceive what the canon is. Or the idea of the canon. And so basically, because of my undergraduate degree, it's just like the canon is so vast. And if you want to read Russian literature, like you want to study Russian canonical literature, of course it's going to be white, because it's all Russian people. Right. So I feel like it really has to do a lot with a lack of teacher expertise. Because there's just everyone that I know that has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, there's no doubt that Zora Neale Hurston is a part of the American canon. She's part of the African American canon, but American canon in general. There's no doubt.
It's easier for a school district to say, hey, we already have these books in our curriculum. The books exist in our bins, in our classroom libraries, in our schools. So, like, they're already there. They've somehow like it's safer, right? Because a principal remembers school, a parent remembers school. So like everyone kind of like has like accepted the books that are there, right? Like they're there. So they're making the assumption that somehow somebody at some point thought that they were worthy of being read and discussed and celebrated. So like there's just this kind of acceptance of the status quo, right? But just because it's easier and safer, in quotation marks, safer, because like, hey, this is what English class is supposed to look like. I think we've just stopped trying to do things differently. There's definitely an elitism and racism in our English departments across the country. Like, right? If you're talking about like, hey, we were the biggest readers in school. We went to college and we were the English majors. And now we get to decide what is worthy of study in our classrooms, in our schools. And so like they're making decisions not with young people in mind. Like they're making decisions based on like what they deem is appropriate. So that's kind of problematic, right? Like I think, yeah.
But isn't that the English teacher's job though, to make those decisions?
To make what decisions?
Which books are read?
Yeah, but I guess I don't know. How do we think about what's worthy of being read and discussed in our classrooms, right? Middle school, high school. Like how many of us are reading the canon, whatever you're describing as the canon, like through the pandemic? I'm not. I say most people are not. Like it's not essential. There is no text that we all need to read to become healthier or happier or more successful, however we want to define success. Like those books don't exist. There is no book that exists. If it did, we would already be reading it across the, like if there were a magic set of books that we knew would take a non-reader and make them a proficient one, we would already be doing that. So my point is like, I don't think anything is essential. And I think who defines like what is complex, what is worthy of being celebrated, what is worthy of being dissected. I think that is going to vary across, teachers are going to disagree about that. Students are going to disagree about that. Departments. So I think a lot of times if we just said, hey, let's, as a group decide, let's figure this out together locally, like where we are as a school, what do our students need? What do our families want? Where are we at as a community? What's pressing? What questions are we grappling with? Like, what are the big essential questions we have? Like, where does it fit into our goals as a district? I think we could do really cool stuff locally, but it's like, it's just, instead we cop out and say, oh, let's just use the stuff we've already got that's here.
Yeah.
Instead of like doing the messier work of kind of rethinking some of that stuff.
So my program, I got my bachelor's degree in my content area, and then I got my master's degree in teaching. So that's how it is at my university, but a lot of places you get a bachelor's degree in teaching. And so, it limits what you can do because you're focused on a degree in teaching, whatever that is. And then like the content is kind of the least important thing. I think that's kind of true of American education in general. We kind of don't value the expertise of a teacher's content. It's more like build relationships and those kinds of things is what you learn in teacher school.
Do you think basic cultural literacy is important in selecting what books you're going to be teaching?
Can you say what you mean more by cultural literacy?
I guess the idea that in society there's just allusions and references to certain texts, certain ideas that come up in classic literature that if you haven't read those books, you're not going to understand the references. Is that even something important?
Yes and no. Like, if you haven't read Romeo and Juliet and you don't get those allusions, you're not going to die. But you did miss out on a part of like cultural literacy. And I know people, if they're listening to this, or they might have like whatever preconceived notions, they're going to think of E.D. Hirsch. And that's fine. And I have read Hirsch, and I agree with his basic points about knowledge matters, and then the whose knowledge and blah blah blah, whatever, all of that. But I think that there are some things that everyone should read. And it's like if you left school never having read, these types of people or these things, or you've never thought about this, we haven't done a good job with our curriculum. And don't put me on the spot and say which people are these.
Well, that's okay. Okay. I won't ask you for specifics, but I do actually want to push a little on that because one of the criticisms of Hirsch, as you say, is that whose knowledge, right?
Yeah.
If we're saying that there's a foundational knowledge everyone needs, but who defines that? So you said that you believe there are some books everyone should read, and I'm not going to ask you what books those are, but do you think there's just a subjectivity to that? Who gets to define what those books are?
Yeah, it's the teacher who should have expertise in their subject.
A question that has come up around literature classrooms, and even more so in the past few weeks, is the question of representation in literature. That is, do students see themselves in the books they are reading? And is that even important?
So I think that's also kind of a misinterpreted question. Oftentimes it's like, there are multiple ways to see yourself in literature. If the only way that you think I can connect with the book is if the author is Black, or if the main character is Black, you obviously don't think that much of me. I'm more than just my race, and so are our students. And they also have, they deal with relationships with people. They have hopes and they have dreams. And, obviously you want to have a wide array of authors, because that's what literature is. You don't want to only teach just white people, but I also wouldn't only teach Black people, because that's not representative of literature. But so an example of like a book where like I wouldn't necessarily see myself, or maybe a teacher wouldn't teach it, is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. He's a German author. He's writing about not even Buddhism, but like kind of like Siddhartha, like the Gautama and all of that. And it's just like, I was 17, Black girl from the hood, like in this IB program, reading this book about nothing I had ever experienced and never thought about. And that book has stayed with me for 11 years now, because it made me think about what it means to be a part of the world, what it means to be an international citizen, what it means to think about how religion influences my life, or like my goals. Like I connected so much with that book, and neither the author or the protagonist looked anything like me.
I mean, I think it's incredibly important. And I think I just wish more people, decision makers, right? We're talking about people in the, English departments or district level, like thinking, again, back to how we started. And I think I need to be more explicit sometimes, like thinking about your Black students in particular, when you're putting out book lists and putting out saying, hey, here are the books we deem essential, and thinking about how the idea, like people love to say, I'm trying to think of how to frame this. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, and that's like the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors metaphor that it gets quoted and used a lot. All students deserve to be able to see themselves reflected in the books they read. But for our Black students, a lot of times they don't get that opportunity. And so if you come to 9th grade where I teach, right, and you're a Black student, chances are you've had a really like subpar K-8 experience in English classrooms, like in the way schools have done literacy or ELA or whatever you want to call it. Like a lot of times it hasn't been designed with all of our students in mind. And so when they come to us in 9th grade, our students, and this is not just our Black students, and you can talk about just in general, like students are like, I don't see myself as a reader. So identity is really important to me. Like, do you identify as a reader and as a writer? And I think because of how we do school, when we do English, a lot of our students just do not develop that identity. They may have it when they're little and it fades. And so like, I'm rambling again, but I guess it's just like, I feel like back to the premise, like I think how we, the English class is not designed with today's student in mind. And oftentimes like today's Black and brown students especially are not at the center when we're thinking about what text we read, how we structure our classrooms.
Now we've arrived at one of the most crucial questions surrounding not just literature class, but education, the question of choice. In the quote-unquote traditional literature classroom setting, the entire class reads the same book as the teacher guides them through literary analysis. That is, the teacher teaches the book. On the other side are book clubs, the most well-known model probably being Lucy Calkins and the Units of Study, in which students choose from a selection of books. Direct instruction on skills occurs during mini lessons. Jasmine and I were talking about reluctant readers before we moved on to the topic of choice.
So I used to think that it was the reluctant readers were just because like the books don't reflect them, the books aren't high interest enough. But then when I sat down and started listening to my students read, and I read the work of Annalee Hanford about like how students are being taught to read, that clicked for me, because the students, they're not fluent readers. So it's like, if you're struggling to read, of course, you're not going to want to read because it's painful and it's not enjoyable. And so my idea around like choice, you choosing a book and you struggling to read the words isn't going to change your attitude. Say you're in 8th grade, but you're reading at 4th grade level, think whatever you want about levels. We'll just say it for, our purposes. You read at a 4th grade level, and I give you a high interest, low level young adult book. So it's at your level, and you're just like, yeah, like I can read this. It's so, like, in my mind, the teacher, I'm like, it's so simple. Like, they'll be able to get into it and they'll love reading. If I gave that kid in the 8th grade, if I gave them A Raisin in the Sun, they probably wouldn't enjoy that book still, because they're still facing the same issues at grade level work. And so a lot of the remedies that were taught in teacher school don't actually address the underlying issues, which is lagging fluency, or maybe they need some phonics work, or, maybe they need more background knowledge about the subject. And so the choice is just a Band-Aid on not fixing any of the actual reasons for why students struggle to read. And so I don't support that. I think that it's really misguided.
Okay. So the movement to push choice, more choice, and I mean, there's entire programs built around an entire literature class around choice. I take it that's not something that you think is beneficial to students.
I don't think it's beneficial at all. In fact, I think it's harmful, especially to students that are developing their English language, students that have disabilities, students that are below grade level. I think that it's actively harmful to them. And it doesn't work with how we know that reading works. You can't teach a passage from, I'm just going to keep going with Invisible Man because it's on my head. You can't take out one page and say, look at how the author develops the character. Now look at how the author develops the character in your book. That's not how you look at character development. You have to look at the arc through a whole book. You can't take out a random skill. So in addition to not actually improving outcomes, in addition to reading like really low quality books, in addition to making it so that not all students are reading, rigorous grade level text, it really just kind of takes apart what literature is supposed to be, which is that shared experience of reading a book together, even if you don't like it. My kids will still just like, no, I disagree with you, because like having kids talk to each other about books that they disagree about, like that's great. And you don't get that if everyone's reading their own book.
Where does choice fit in for you in the literature classroom?
Choice drives a lot of what we do, right? Like as human beings, like teenagers, teenagers hate being bored. They hate being told what to do. They hate doing things that they don't feel like matter to them. And they're not wrong, right? Like we all want connection and entertainment and belonging. And of course, we want to be able to, as teachers, we want to be able to give feedback. So it's the goal of an English teacher is not to teach text, right? It's to teach skills. So we want students to be able to have strong reading skills, writing skills, be able to give feedback and all the good stuff that we love to do. You can do that with a lot of text, right? There's no like one that is going to be the magic text. So like letting students drive a lot of what they read. You're going to say like, all right, we could do the traditional way. And maybe students will read 4 or 5 books during that year. And maybe they'll read them. Maybe they'll like some of them. And maybe if the teacher's really passionate, maybe they'll get into it for a little bit. And, oh, that was fun. Or you could say, hey, let's give you the opportunity to find what you love. Let's give you time in our classroom to read that. And then to talk about it with your friends and your classmates. And we make recommendations and build this community of readers and writers. And you may read 10, 20, 30, 40 books of a variety of genres. And you're reading nonfiction when you feel like it, and you're reading graphic novels when you feel like it. And then we've got these shared texts of whether we're reading, speeches or poems or TED Talks, or like there are still shared texts that are complex, that are grade level that we're going to do. But when we're talking about, that independent reading piece, we're going to let you drive a lot of that. And then we're going to let you drive a lot of how you respond to it. And we're going to let you create your own stuff, and you're going to write a lot. And like, it's messier because it's not, here's the one text that we're all on this page, and then here's this, but it's to me much more beautiful, and you get at like volume of reading and writing that students are doing, so it's going to lead to better performance if that's what people care about too.
We eventually moved on to talk about the goals of the literature classroom, and here, not surprisingly, Jared and Jasmine had very different views again. After Jasmine discusses what she hopes her students get out of her class, Jared talks about how he turned his goals for his students into Project Lit. I'm going to read a quote to you from it's an educator and blogger named Jacqueline Stallworth. She wrote recently, she's talking about the traditional literary canon, books like maybe Invisible Man or The Great Gatsby. She said, "It seems that these books are not creating lifelong readers and thinkers, but instead it seems that the teaching of these books is creating students who rely heavily on Google, Spark Notes, and the teacher." What do you make of that notion that students maybe are just trying to get through literature courses rather than really engaging with the literature?
I'd say to what you just said, students just trying to get through. Yes, I think that is something that students have to deal with, because it's possible that their teacher isn't approaching literature in the correct way. If you don't have expertise, how can you communicate a really complicated novel to students? This isn't teacher based, it's just being honest. Like if you told me to teach Invisible Man next year, I'd have a hard time because I haven't done enough study around it. I think, is the point of English literature to create lifelong readers? Is that why I study? Is that why I teach? Secondly, my job is to teach. So of course, students are going to kind of rely on me now because I'm building up their literary knowledge. They don't have the same knowledge that I do yet. There's just so many things with that statement that are just like a bunch of like just platitude. It's just, do you have an aversion to teaching is one of my questions too. It's like, depending on the teacher, it's like, I'm supposed to teach them stuff. So of course.
To this point about lifelong readers, how do you feel though that at least one component of your job, or maybe it's not even an explicit responsibility though, is to at least have students walk out of your classroom feeling like they want to keep reading beyond the assignments?
I don't see my goal as trying to create lifelong readers, trying to make someone love reading. That's just a goal that is just, how do you measure that? Like 20 years from now, you pick up a book and you're like, oh, I'm a reader now. I just think it's just like this painting of English teachers and teachers in general is just like, it doesn't matter if they, if they're proficient at this. It's just as long as they love reading. Like it feels very like patronizing to think that. However, I will say that, there are people that I went to school with where we all read the same book, and maybe they're not readers now, but that literature has stuck with them that they read. So my goal when students leave my classroom isn't to create lifelong readers, but if they never pick up a book again, they have read some really great books that are going to stick with them. That's how I approach it.
A lot of the work we've done with Project Lit happened right in our classroom at Maplewood High School in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a group of young people and their crazy teacher reading initially about book deserts and the importance of book access, and us thinking, sitting around a classroom having conversations like these book deserts, right? The idea that like a student in East Nashville is not going to be able to find a library or a bookstore nearby, and that there are going to be very few books in our classroom libraries, and there are going to be very few books like it's intentional, right? Like the idea that we can do something about that was very, very exciting. So at a very simple level, it was us saying, hey, how do we go about eliminating book deserts here in Nashville? And then we just set about like in our classroom, setting aside time to launch a book drive and reach out to community members and organizations and fundraise and write grants and do all this really cool stuff, run social media accounts. Like us as a team, as a group, we just set about flooding our classroom and our school and our community with books, building little libraries, setting them up in community centers and YMCAs and things like that. And then like this idea of a community book club. So we're like, hey, let's invite people in to read books that we're excited to read. Crossover by Kwame Alexander, March by John Lewis, which is like the Nashville history that students should be getting in school, but are not getting. And so we're having these conversations. Students are presenting like their research projects to community members, where they're reading to younger kids and they're being reading role models and they're feeling empowered. And so we're doing all this work. And what we essentially created was a chapter, right? So we were the first Project Lit chapter. And it's a group of students that are doing this literacy work together. And we shared every step of our journey on social media. So it was for the people that were following us, they're like, hey, how do we get involved? And so we, one by one, we encourage other schools to join our community and launch their own Project Lit chapter. And so over the past 3+ years, you've got like 1,500 schools across the country, and now the world. We got a few in Canada and Ghana, different places, like, who believe in this work and in this community to affect change and to have awesome conversations around new and exciting and complex books. And so it's grown a lot. It's evolved, but at a very simple level, my role, I'm still the high school English teacher who's super excited to empower the students in my classroom to continue this.
Yeah, you said recently that something to the effect of Project Lit wouldn't need to exist if schools and libraries did their jobs.
If the conditions were in place in our high school back in 2016, so if we already had an amazing classroom library, if we already had class sets of new and exciting books that we could read or we could pair or do whatever with, if we could have opportunities, like the calendar was set for us to have book clubs, like community book clubs. So we didn't have to make room for it. We could have, like, there's already room in the budget for donuts, and there's already room, ways to engage our community in real conversation. If students were actually already given like a voice and opportunities to read and to write in authentic ways. Yeah, and if they were already like engaged as readers, right? If they were already seeing themselves as readers and writers, I don't think we would have ever even thought to start Project Lit. It wouldn't even need to exist. Like some schools, I think we, and I guess that would be thinking through it further. A goal would be for Project Lit not to even need to exist, right?
Yeah,
like in a way, right? And I hope we get to that point where like every school already has kind of reimagined and redesigned what literacy and what English looks like at their school.
Mm-hmm. Did you get pushback from administration? Because I could picture a teacher, an English teacher, listening to this and thinking, this sounds great, but if I played this interview for my administrators, they would lose it. They would never allow anything like this. Did you encounter anything like that? Or do you agree with that sentiment that some teachers might feel like they would have no opportunity to try something like Project Lit?
100%. I actually had to move schools for that reason, right? I started this with my students, and even we weren't supported in our own school we were initially. We had great leadership, and it was never the people in the school itself. The people in our school, our principal, other teachers, like, they saw it. Like, this is awesome for our school, for our community. We've got people coming in every month for conversation. Our students are crushing the ACT. They're getting accepted to college. They're writing about, they have all these like community service hours for their application. It's project-based learning. It's social emotional learning. It hit everything that our school and district said that we cared about. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of what drives education is money and compliance and control and textbook companies and testing companies. And you have just a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of politics that get in the way of doing what's best for teachers and what's best for kids. So I think sometimes in some districts, you're going to have a teacher go to their principal and they're going to say, run with it. This sounds awesome. They see it in action. They hear about it. The people who say no, here's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep their job. That's it.
With their different approaches naturally comes some very different texts. And so I asked Jasmine and Jared to each talk about a text from their classroom. Maybe talk me through how you prepare to teach a novel or a play, and how you set the students up for success. How do you ensure that they're going to get the most out of it? And maybe use an example of one you've taught or you're going to teach.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I did on my fences thread, I said, like, I got to this point in the play where Troy switches. So he says the N-word, the whole play. But then there's this one line where he stops himself and says, those Negroes, when he's talking to Rose. And that really stood out to me. And so I was like, this is very important. The entire play, this one line can kind of teach the reader like what the author is doing around like having Troy say this N-word so much. And so when I did that, I like went on like a Google search. I was like, how am I going to communicate this significance to students? And so I went and I found this essay by Gloria Naylor about what the N-word meant to her growing up, and how it's different, like how she heard her family members say it. Gloria Naylor's a Black woman, so how it felt when her family member said it versus when like a young white boy said it to her. And she was just like, I had never heard the word before until that white boy, he could use it to humiliate me. And so like that essay is going to be how I'm going to ground students in thinking about the N-word through the play. And so that's just one instance of how I'm approaching teaching it. You have to read it all the way through. You have to annotate it. You have to make, if there's an allusion that the author's making, I say like, do I need to explicitly tell them this, or should I have them read about it themselves? I mean, it took, that play is only 100 pages and it took me 3 hours to really mark it up. And I still haven't even made all the curriculum. I've made some questions in there. So really, as I'm planning, I'm just thinking, my first step in planning is like, what do they need to know to get into this play? What, if it's historical context, they need to learn about the Great Migration. They should have some knowledge about that, but I don't know. Do they need that? What is like some other literary knowledge that they might need? So I'll bring that in. If there's like a specific literary device that the author is using, am I going to need to parse those out for students too? So I mean, there's a lot that goes into planning to teach a novel, not just saying like I'm going to give them 10 pages a day. It's so much more beyond that.
Can you talk about an example of a novel or any text that a student chose that you really saw had an impact on that student or a group of students? Maybe something that a listener might never consider in the literature classroom.
So yeah, I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of one that's new, right? Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. It's a novel in verse. And we actually had to pair it. So initially, right, the district, we could also acknowledge that the classics, the classics in quotations, a lot of schools are moving away from that anyway. They're moving to like a heavy diet of close reading, right? Scripted curriculum. So it's like not even novels anymore. It's, hey, we're going to look at this one text for a week and kill it to death. And go ahead. What's that? Yeah.
Or excerpts,
right? So like, right. I think a lot of times the novel is not even the old novel is not even a challenge in our district. It's a lot of this complex text stuff, right? The complex in quotations. Anyway, The Lottery, Shirley Jackson, was a required text. Super dope because it's not super long, right? But you're able to get into it. So we read that, and we're thinking about these questions about the danger of following tradition and looking at different things. So in my brain, I'm like, let's pair this with Jason Reynolds' novel, Long Way Down, which you could listen to. He reads it himself as, audiobook format. We had the books in front too. Like you can listen to him read it in 2 or 3 days. So it moves super quick. It's this awesome experience. And it's a teenager today, Will, grappling with a lot of these similar questions. Like, does he follow the rules of his community? And so students are writing. So the book ends with a cliffhanger. And so students are writing their own endings to that story. They're writing it either in a screenplay, they're writing it in traditional short story format, they're writing it in verse, mimicking the author. They're also writing a literary analysis. So like we're taking like the traditional lit analysis essay, but they're applying it to this book. Like what's the major statements you think the book is making? What do you want to say about this book? And we're like going through that writing process. They're creating these awesome one-pagers after the book takes place in an elevator. So like 7, 6, 5. So they're creating these beautiful one-pagers as they listen to each floor. So we're hitting like a whole bunch of different stuff, creating all this awesome writing and artwork, and conversations are happening. And it's all within like a 2-week period. Like we did this like amazing, amazing work. But it also didn't drag on for an entire 9 weeks, right? And they could then get back to their choice stuff too. So you're not like, I think a lot of times it's like keeping the momentum going, right? Like be able to build community, hit a bunch of skills and standards, but also make it mean something. And that's just one example, I think, that's just been awesome for our classroom.
As we closed out our conversations, I asked both Jasmine and Jared to talk about a specific book. In Jasmine's case, one that inspired her as a young reader. And from Jared, a recent text that he thinks would make some great summer reading. So I just want to actually get you out of here on this last question. You said that Of Mice and Men was the first book you read that made you love literature.
Yeah.
And I think probably all of us have that somewhere, that first book. What was that like, reading that book and discovering literature?
So I was in the 9th grade, and I mean, that was the first time where I feel like we really, really started to study literature. So it's like we were doing like the annotating of the text and like more like whole group discussions and like all of those things. It's funny, like the teacher in this class, she's actually, I remember her being quite racist to my class. It was an advanced class, but they made 2 sections, one for the white students and then one for everyone else. And so they put me in the everyone else one, and she would tell us like, I'm going to give you guys like less of an assignment because you can't do it because you're not there yet.
Wow.
But in her class, reading that book, it made me see like, literature can be for me. I just thought like the story of like Lenny and George and Crooks, it was just like you just got caught up in the moment, and like the language is so good. And like the thing is, looking back, I reread Of Mice and Men in December just for fun last December, and I was reading it and I came across the N-word. And the thing is, when I'm looking back, I don't remember that word being in the text at all. So what I remembered wasn't my teacher made me read a book with the N-word, because I'm just assuming she, hopefully she approached it the right way or something. But I remember like that story of friendship and broken dreams and, moving forward and kind of feeling stuck and whatever, like that's what I remembered. And so that's the kind of experience that I want to give my students, is not with reading the N-word, but, having that, like, I get literature, even if I'm not going to be a literature person, if I'm never going to read again, it's just like, there was a book that has stayed with me. And if I choose to read it again, I'll get something new. That's Ron Rosenbaum. He says like canonical literature it's a bottomless well. No matter when you read it, how many times you read it, every single time you go back, there's something new to see. And I think that not every book has that, but the best literature that draws on lots and lots of other authors and lots of places and lots of allusions, that's where you get that bottomless well.
Wow. Well, Jasmine Lane, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your insights on this.
Thanks. It was great to talk about books.
Well, let me get you out of here on this one. You've mentioned a few texts, Just Mercy, The Hate You Give, Long Way Down. Can you leave my listeners with one more recommendation? What's a book you've just read or you're reading that you can give a shout out to as a good summer read?
Ooh. We Are Not From Here by Jenny Torres Sanchez. It tracks 3 teenagers from Central America and their journey to the United States. Was absolutely breathtaking and heartbreaking, but like, talk about writing and the quality, just beautiful. And it will wreck you. I had a friend who listened to it as an audiobook on our drive, like up to visit family. And she was on break, so she was texting me like, "What is wrong with you? I am crying." That's one that I've just read. The Nickel Boys too, for an adult read, award-winning book. Also will just make you think about education, where we are as a country and where we need to go. That was The Nickel Boys too, is one that I just read recently. That was outstanding.
Fantastic. Well, Jared Amato, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I apologize. I'm sure if you have the editing ability, I know there are pieces that I love to go back and that's I thank you for setting up this conversation, because I had a lot of fun thinking about it.
So this is the 25th episode of the podcast. I think for the 50th, I'll have Jasmine and Jared back, only it'll be a live Zoom debate and we'll raise money for charity. Thanks so much to both of my guests. I'm curious about where you, dear listener, land on this issue. You probably came into this episode with your own position, whether it lines up with Jasmine or Jared or falls somewhere else. If you're an English teacher, what books are you teaching? Do your students have some choice? As always, I welcome comments and questions on Twitter at BigIdeaEd. I hope this episode gave you something to think about. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, big thanks to Jasmine and Jared. Check them out on Twitter, on their blogs, to keep this conversation and debate going. Thanks for checking out What's the Big Idea. See you next time.
Shadow of uncertain living, hang low and keep us in